feel like we're just missing the guitars or something up here.
We have 742 slides, or not. You decide which one you want it to be.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lanny Cohen. I'm the Chief Technology and Innovation Officer at Capgemini, and it's an honor and pleasure to be with you all today, and thanks for attending. We've got, I think, a very interesting session ahead of us, and we're going to do something I think maybe a little different than what a lot of these sessions are about. We're not going to focus too much on kind of the what, which you're getting a lot of at reInvent, and we're going to focus a little bit more on the how to get things done and what some of the challenges are along the way. We've got an incredible panel, a very unique panel with a very interesting, diverse set of perspectives and dimensions to bring to the subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves because they'll do a much better job of doing that than I will. And then I'll kind of frame the session a little bit in more detail, and then we'll get into it. And the way we're going to run it is we'll kind of do a little Q&A with the team here for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have about 15 minutes at the end to open it up to the audience for your questions. Okay? So,
great.
Gary?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Gary Watkins. I'm the Shared Services Chief Information Officer for Car Auction Services. We're an automotive remarketing service provider focused on wholesale and salvage auctions and in the finance industry. We've actually been on our cloud journey for about 2.5 years. We're still on that journey and happy to share some insights from our learnings over that time.
I'm Jeff Nyheim, and I have the honor of leading the Amazon Web Services business across the central United States. So for those of you from the US or familiar with the basic geography, it's essentially north and south from Louisiana and Texas, and then a kind of oil and gas business there up through the Dakotas in Ohio. So delighted to be here.
Very good. And hello, everyone. I'm Brian Hammond. I'm with Sogeti. I lead our cloud business for the USA. Sogeti is the technology and engineering services division of the Capgemini Group. So about 200,000 people worldwide. We're a services provider. And in the cloud world, we do everything from advisory services on architecture, security, organizational readiness, migrations to the cloud, native cloud development, and then managed services on the cloud. And AWS is our largest partner.
So we've got a lot of perspectives that we can really drill down on an incredible company in car auction services, double-digit growth company, very dynamic industry, and a very dynamic time in that industry as well. One of the things we've done over the past couple of years is when we looked at the cloud space early on, we found that as companies matured in terms of their adoption of the cloud, there was a series of phases they would typically go through. The first, for lack of a better term, was kind of an initiation phase. Companies kind of went into that phase to get some cost benefit, some efficiency, maybe their first experience with the cloud, moving dev tests into the cloud, that type of thing. The second phase was more of creating a business platform of how they could use the cloud to really give more speed and agility to the business. And then kind of the third was where the cloud became more a way of life, where things like transformation, innovation, data-driven enterprise, these types of topics would really start to become front and center for the enterprise. And out of that started to evolve this concept of a cloud-first strategy, which is really, I think, at the heart of what you'll hear about with the group. At the same time that we were kind of looking at all kind of these changes and a lot of innovation, what we also found is that the preponderance of innovation in the market was very high. And consider innovation however you want to do it, cloud, AI, machine learning, whatever the topic is. But we found a lot of enterprises were struggling with was how to adopt, how to apply, and how to consume the innovation, particularly at speed, at scale, with a high degree of security and a high degree of certainty. So again, what we want to do with this team today is look at three dimensions of the how. The first we're going to look at a little bit is operating models and how do you really get that kind of agility in the business by leveraging a cloud-first strategy. The second thing we want to do is we want to look at adoption a little bit and what are the challenges of kind of making this type of transformational change around such a fundamental technology as cloud. And then the third thing we want to explore a little bit is data and how the dynamics around becoming more of a data-driven enterprise, moving on to analytics, ultimately AI and machine learning, kind of come home to roost in a situation like that. So I'm going to just kind of fire off some questions to these guys, and we'll kind of see where it takes us. So let's start with the question of agility and operating model a little bit. And Brian, I'm going to shoot this one over to you. But first thing is, how do you see cloud enabling business agility in general? And what are some of the key factors that make that agility really come to fruition?
Sure. So business agility and the rate of change in business today is one of my favorite topics. I love talking about this topic with customers. We're all familiar with what Uber and Lyft have done to the taxi industry, what Airbnb is doing to the hotel industry. There's many, many examples, but the reality is in today's business world, we've got to be able to be very nimble, very agile, be able to adapt very quickly. One of my favorite kind of tidbits, the original phone line took about 75 years to reach 50 million customers. Pokemon Go did it in a little over a week. So that's how fast things have changed in our current business climate.
Not necessarily for the better in that instance.
Yeah.
Debatable, yeah. But let's look at the automotive industry where car operates today. So we have driverless cars coming out sometime in the next 3, 5, 10 years. Theoretically, they're going to have a 97% reduction in car accidents. So what does that mean if you're in the car insurance industry? How's that going to change your world radically over the next 5, 10 years? The salvage industry could be seriously impacted. Electric cars generally should run longer than gasoline cars, less moving parts, et cetera. So big changes like that in almost every industry, and I'm picking on automotive because that's our topic here today, are going to really affect how businesses operate. So the question is, how are you going to be nimble and agile so you can address these as they occur? Now, does cloud alone make you an Airbnb or an Uber? Obviously not. But is it a big part of the story? Absolutely, because the cloud lets you have that scale, that agility, that ability to adapt very quickly with your IT systems that support your business. So that's why I think it's very, very important today that companies are leveraging the benefits of cloud, whether it's in an IaaS capacity or even more preferably a PaaS capacity, so you have that nimbleness, that agility, as business climates keep changing very rapidly across many industries.
And Jeff, let me switch over to you now.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've got an incredibly broad purview in terms of the types of customers you're seeing and working with.
Very diverse portfolio.
Right. And so as you've started to experience with those clients, their move to the cloud, what types of new roles, process changes are kind of the more obvious ones that people are trying to deal with?
Yeah, if I can take it just a little bit, let me talk about a couple of the enablers to answering the question, because that's the question that probably everybody in the room has that is at some point in the journey. And I'll work my way back to the core question, which is what roles change. The short answer, of course, is almost every role changes. And so it's a function of how do they change, how quickly they change, and how to manage that change in a way that is exciting from a career perspective and for each individual, and also is a source of good for a company. So you're not distracted from having to manage the business of the business on a day in, day out basis. I suspect you have to keep the doors open.
Yep.
So there are a couple of things that AWS does that if you're not yet familiar with it and haven't gone through, I encourage you to do so. First off is this cloud adoption framework. And the AWS Cloud Adoption Framework essentially is templatizing through a series of best practices learned from 1 million+ customers at this point over the course of the last decade, templatizing the planning process. We have 6 key focus areas. It starts with the business, so what are the business outcomes that you're driving to? Thinks about people, how are the people impacted, which gets directly to the roles. Thinks about the governance of the organization, not just inside IT, but more broadly. And that's what would be critical. Think about having a difference between IT security and corporate risk management. They're interrelated, but they're not the same function. Both need to be engaged in the security, in the cloud journey. And then from that, we move to a set of things that feel a lot more like technology. So the platform itself, operations, and security. So against each of those 6 factors, doing a gap analysis and determining gap analysis around skills, around core processes, and then determining the dependencies amongst them. Pretty straightforward. Very few companies, again, back to your question, very few companies amongst the approximately 1,300 I have a chance to work with are doing that work with that level, that deliberateness, that intentional approach. From that, it's pretty clear as then where those skill gaps are and how then to create a training and certification plan by role in each of the companies.
And Gary, let me turn to you now, because again, I think, with the focus on car in particular, if you back up a little bit, how did you guys start to think about agility? Was that an objective you were trying to pursue? Was it something that just kind of evolved, once you got into the project a little bit? And then after you answer that,
Sure.
then come back to the roles
Sure.
that Jeff just alluded to and how that kind of manifested itself.
Sure. I mean, I think like most companies, agility is that ability to adapt and get out ahead of rather than constantly reacting, right? So agility is more around like proactively looking at what you need to do and having the agility to turn and veer as needed with the right velocity as we go forward. So that was absolutely one of the core tenets of our organization as we evolve, as we mature, as we grow that business. And it's definitely one of the core tenets that we've driven down into the technology organization as well. So really, as you look at the roles that we've had and we continue to change, and I'd echo much of what Jeff thought, we're on that journey. Everything's changing, right? All the roles are changing. It's really around how do you tear down those silos and create that convergence of culture, but do it intentionally, right? And I think it's about explaining the why, helping people through that journey, making sure that they understand what the business outcomes are, and I'll say fundamentally making sure that those folks understand that their best interests are being taken into account and helping to train them and develop the new capabilities as we go forward.
Was alignment between kind of the business agility and what you needed to do on the IT side pretty obvious from the start, or was that something that, again, you guys had to work on?
Obvious in a painful way, possibly. But no, I'd say definitely, it's that velocity versus reaction. And I think that's really where we really had to focus and emphasize what were the intentional acts that we were going to do as an organization, not just the business and not just the IT organization, but how do we blend those together to become this business technology function that really could adapt to the needs and the demands of our business, rather really than looking at it like what can we supply to our industry. It's more about the demand.
And you talk about reactive and proactive. So the new was probably a little bit more about being proactive.
Sure.
The traditional was probably more reactive. Is there any other kind of big differences between current state and future state?
No, I think the whole emphasis is around how do we drive value and create new ways of generating revenue and solving customer experience problems for our organization. It's very easy to look at that with a greenfield application and understanding how to do that. Most of us don't have that luxury of having that throughout our organization entirely. So we had to really look at what runs the business, what gets cars through the auctions, what drives that financial aptitude within our organization, and how are we going to transform those capabilities as well.
Okay. Jeff, let me go back to you, and I just want to kind of get into another subject that comes up oftentimes when you start talking about cloud, which is the subject around risk, right? So again, when you speak about operational agility, how, from an AWS perspective, do you guys think about that proper balance between mitigating and managing risk, but at the same time gaining the advantages of agility and speed?
I think when we hear risk, mostly in a forum like this week, we think about security. And so job zero for AWS is ensuring that we're offering a secure platform. If not in the first 5 minutes, in the second 5 minutes of a conversation I have with a new client or one we've been working with for a good deal of time, likely we'll want to address security and regulatory compliance. And so I counsel to all of you is to establish expertise amongst individuals or a small team around what AWS and cloud security in general means, AWS security specifically means. We have a lot of information around our shared security model, so you understand what we do and what you do, and that's certainly clearly important. I think more broadly, because that's actually sort of a deep dive around security, maybe having some of our solution architects engage with you to do a well-architected review, benefit from the great services from partners like Sogeti and CAP. We can get past that pretty quickly, is my experience. Lots of fear factor, and then addressing it with facts, we tend to move on pretty quickly. So then more broadly thinking about risk and compliance, I would say differentiating, profile, segment, prioritize your apps, your data, and your users. And so you're very clear about those areas which are high risk and those which are less risk, and not let the high risk areas that may exist in an organization prevent you from moving forward, perhaps very aggressive, very assertively, with the low risk areas. The other thing I would suggest is to differentiate between what is the law, what is the regulation for your industry or your vertical in a given country, what is the policy of the company, what is the preference for the individual, and then what is as well as the sort of personal risk tolerance for the one or more individuals that are defining what risk means in an organization. I have found it to be super helpful. Literally a whiteboard, write those down, and let's figure out really where are we on this particular topic of conversation. And it's okay to acknowledge all of them, and they're all relevant.
Well, I think, Jeff, it's really important to understand what that risk tolerance of your business is, so that you understand where do you want to take risk, where do you need to be cautious. I'd really say it takes a village, right? And you were talking about it. I think it's understanding your customers, understanding your business, understanding the industry, understanding the regulations, the laws, the things that you mentioned. But it's really more around how do you create that culture of security and risk management, because you're not going to eliminate it, right? And I think any company that's trying to eliminate it is probably constraining their growth and their overall value that they can contribute back into their industry.
Gary, did you find from a business leadership perspective that there was more of a willingness or I guess a willingness to maybe extend that risk tolerance a little bit? I mean, given what you guys were trying to do in the business?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to the individual, and I think it really comes back to relationships and understanding people's business drivers, right? So, we have two facets of the organization. One's a finance aspect of the organization, probably much more risk adverse, right? And much more controlled in managing those risks. Then we have the outside, more wholesale market in the auction industry, much more aggressive. How quickly can we get there? And I think it's really around understanding what's the overall risk tolerance to the enterprise, getting on a whiteboard and mapping it out and making sure that everyone's clear on what's the cost benefit analysis and what's the risk tolerance that we're willing to take as an organization.
I'm sorry, Brian, my words, not yours, but transparency, I would think is probably a big one there.
And alignment. I think that's the key, right? When you start getting different aspects of your business, whether that be the difference between the IT organization and your operational organization, or two different leaders within the overall organization that have different views of that, it's how do you get them aligned to make sure that we're making the right business decisions based on where we want to get to as an organization.
Go, Bray.
There's one thing I'll add, I'll build on what Jeff and Gary are saying. Oftentimes when working with our customers, we'll help them to tier their systems, because if, obviously risk is always out there, security, all those topics. But if you want to have a bias towards action, if you know you want to move to the cloud, but you don't want to spend 2 years assessing everything you've got and figuring it all out, by categorizing things, you can start to move some things that are maybe lower risk to have that bias towards action and get things moving while you get everything else in place to handle the higher risk workloads. So it's a pretty good strategy a lot of our customers have implemented, but I strongly encourage you to have a bias towards action and not get bogged down in a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year process assessing your whole organization and figuring it out. If you get some things moving, it usually accelerates the journey quite a bit.
But don't underestimate what we're saying. It's really fun, right? When you start talking about the security and the compliance around these things. I think the important aspect really is understanding your risk. For us, that was really around data sovereignty and the localization, right, of that data. It was around encryption, right, whether that be in flight or at rest. For us, around that shift in our industry around opting in versus opting out, and that right to be forgotten is a big element of that data privacy and how we look at our business. And I hate to say it, but the really intentional heavy lifting is understanding all your data elements. right? Understanding them in a detailed form, having them categorized, having them classified, and then once you get through all that, then you have to understand how does that data flow through your organization, in and out of systems, in and out of your organization. Who touches that data? And I think that's a big piece of it. It's detailed, heavy lifting and work that you have to be focused on to make sure that you get to that right outcome from a business perspective.
Gary and Brian, let me ask you guys to maybe tag team this one, more of a tactical question. So you had some type of systems development life cycle that you were probably working in a traditional way on projects. You've got the cloud adoption framework from AWS. Sogeti has a methodology for executing cloud projects. You probably had some ideas of your own. So how did you begin to rationalize these various inputs and come up with something that would work at Car Auction Services?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think some of it is just trial and error and iterating over these different practices and principles. Again, we've been on this journey and certainly aren't done yet. So the practices and the methodologies that we're using are constantly evolving. We've not seen a big change because most of our teams, whether that be on-prem or in the cloud, are already leveraging the agile methodology. So I think it's really, for us, it's around giving some autonomy and some flexibility to those individual teams to adapt to how they want to work and what the skills and gifts that they have within individuals in that team to adapt how they do work to get the most efficient, effective products that we want to get out for our organization.
Yeah. And I'll split the answer up into maybe two. If you're doing native cloud development or greenfield type areas, most of the time we recommend more of a DevOps type model. I know DevOps is a hot word that means a lot of things to a lot of people, but in general, something like a DevOps model for native development. When you're talking about migrations, I'll get a little tactical here, Lanny, as you said. Generally, it's a simple process of assessing the application, migrating it, and then decommissioning the various things. And that's true whether you're lifting and shifting it or replatforming it. Obviously, those are two different approaches in the middle there. But there's a lot of things we've implemented that help the process. We do things like have migration parties. So if you've got 20 apps you want to move, you'll sit 5 people down in the same room for 2 weeks with the goal of getting them all moved, and you have a party at the end. So it kind of injects the people side we've talked about a little bit with the technology side, generally gets things moving faster. There's a lot of little tricks like that that can help a journey to the cloud and make it a little fun for your team, but also get things done more quickly.
Okay, so we kind of talked a little bit about kind of operating models, agility, cadence, that type of thing. Now let's get to where the fun and the sweat really begins. So some of the challenges and the cultural changes. So Brian, let me kind of start with you on that. And even outside of Car Auction Services, what are you seeing as some of the big challenges now that companies are trying to deal with as they move towards a cloud-first strategy and some of the cultural changes?
Yep. So first, Lanny, I would say the nature of that very question has changed a lot in just the past year or two from my perspective. 2 years ago, it was security as a reason not to go to the cloud, a whole host of reasons. Most of that, from my perspective, is now flip-flopped. Security is a reason to go to the cloud. We actually have customers who have had breaches that have decided to move to the cloud specifically to improve their security. But I think in terms of roadblocks and challenges, it's less on the technical side. You have a very diverse set of stakeholders when you talk about a serious move to the cloud. You have the infrastructure teams, the app teams, the business stakeholders. A large move to the cloud may even go all the way up to the CEO level, right? Because you're moving assets into the trust of another partner like AWS. So I think that fear of change and the diversity of stakeholders is one challenge that a lot of organizations are surprised by. Getting a little more tactical on more of the technical side. If you have more modern applications, moving them to the cloud is usually pretty straightforward. If you've got some very legacy, older type technology, it's going to be a more difficult move. May involve rewriting or replatforming entirely. Don't move to the cloud just for money's sake. If you're just trying to save money, you might, but it's not generally what I would recommend to be a main reason for moving to the cloud. Speed, agility, the innovation that's in the software today, those are the reasons to move to the cloud more so than a simple cost savings play, because you might find that you're not saving that much money. Sometimes you will, but it's not necessarily the best reason in my opinion. Then lastly, I would strongly encourage, if you're moving to the cloud, a good governance model, good practices, how you're going to manage your subscriptions. All of that whole area is very, very vital, because if it gets let loose in an unorganized way, you might have some questions coming in that you weren't ready for in terms of spend and different things like that. So a good governance model is also critical in terms of getting over those roadblocks to a move to the cloud.
And you know, the thing that I would add is that the wrapper around that is your organizational change management, right? And I would say just because you've answered a question once, don't underestimate, I'll say, the willingness and the ability for your teams to be able to constantly reflect and answer the question of why. Why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? You know, are we afraid of lock-in? Are we afraid of, you know, outgrowing and outpacing our business? Have those questions answered. Make sure you're socializing those. Socialize them again. Socialize them again. And I think that's all around that organizational change management, and making sure that you know why you're doing it and all your team knows why you're doing it as well.
If I can build on this.
Yeah.
There's this notion, we talk about it all week, about centers of excellence, landing zones, tiger teams, your cloud SWAT engineers. Essentially, in Amazonian terms, it's quite often an initial team size of 3 to 5 individuals who are dedicated to determining the how of cloud, not why, but how are we going to do this. And often you can add a few roles. The role that I see missing, every customer, they put somebody from the security team in that role. They put somebody on the data team. They put somebody from IT ops. They put somebody from dev. They'll want to make sure that there's a network, you know, that networking has a seat at the table. What they don't resource is somebody who literally has expertise at change management and creating that case for change, and then communicating that, and communicating it, and communicating it. And so that has nothing to do with the technology and everything to do with the cultural transformation, which is quite substantive.
And I think that's probably been one of our biggest either lessons learned or success criteria. It's a really an unnatural role to put in a technology organization. If you can get it out of your organization operationally side, I think you've got it, right? But I would say, irregardless of where it comes from, you have to have a focus on that organizational change management to get your staff and organization over that hump.
Gary, unpack the kind of the change management for us a little bit. So, you know, once you kind of, you know, went down deep in it, what were actually some of the barriers that you encountered? Where was the resistance?
Well, I think at the core of all organizational change management is the willingness to change, right? And I would say the FUD factor, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And how do you unpack and uncover what all those fears, uncertainties, and doubts are? Address them, right? I would say fundamentally don't hide from them, right? You have to hit those things head on if you want to create the velocity and, I'll say quite frankly, the trust and transparency with your teams. I think when you get to that level, it goes back to answering why, helping them understand what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and then fundamentally, I'll say executing and creating success, where you start to have internal folk becoming your advocates and driving toward that for an organizational health.
And Brian and Jeff, what have you guys seen, again, you know, in the market in general? What are some, you know, change obstacles that maybe you wouldn't have anticipated, but kind of reared up that you had to deal with?
I guess an obvious one, and yet it's sort of surprising how prominent it is and how tough it is to wrestle through. It's just really the economics of the cloud. There are very few organizations, and it doesn't matter whether your orientation is primarily technology or your orientation is primarily finance. The economics and determining cost and resulting benefit and comparing a cloud first orientation for the next 3 months, 3 apps, or three petabytes of data are just fundamentally different than the expertise that's accumulated over the course of the last several decades. And so it's having an understanding in the organization, and it starts with having one person, you know, on a team like yours as an example, that just really fundamentally understands the economics. It's very difficult to get it, you know, it's for many companies absent a set of best practices, tools, and templates. It's hard to do apples to apples comparison.
Just a few real-world examples we've come across in the past year or so. Large enterprise wrote a security policy 10 years ago that does not translate into the cloud. So they had to go rewrite their security policy, large bureaucratic organization, took a very long time. So it slowed them way down. Just a simple example. Having third-party software licensing agreements that don't translate into the cloud. So you have to call them up, get a new licensing agreement. Those are some tactical things in a journey to the cloud that you will come across typically.
Or assuming they won't, but they actually do. Same thing, right? I mean,
Yeah,
so it's just about
absolutely.
taking the unknown to the known and then dealing with it in a rational, project basis.
Right.
Agreed.
Right.
So from a skill set perspective, I heard about the OCM, the organizational change management skill set, that type of thing. But yesterday during the keynote and a variety of other sessions, over the course of the program here, we hear about shortage of talent, and we need to find ways to get people up to speed much quicker on the new technologies and stuff. From a skill set perspective, has that been a challenge for you, Gary, in terms of having those resident skills to start to take on some of the new, or is that what you got from Brian and the Sogeti team, or?
Yeah, I would say we certainly leverage our strategic partners effectively, but we're really trying to build those capabilities and practices in-house as well. I think that's core to the health and the longevity of our organization. I think we're all in a talent war, so for me to say it's not a problem would be a bit dismissive or overlooking. I think the real goal for us, we've really focused on our cultural tenets. We would take an individual's aptitude and attitude hands down over technical skills. We really believe that we can bring individuals up on technical skills, capabilities, whether that be Java, Node.js, Python, to help us in the AWS transformation pretty easily, certainly without or with less barrier and constraint than, I'll say, changing someone's cultural beliefs and how they want to operate and the type of organization that we want to be part of. So that's really where our focus is at.
Okay. And Jeff and Brian, let me ask from your perspectives, what have you seen in terms of some of the skill sets that were relatively easy to shift in terms of current skill to new skill, and maybe what were one or two that were more challenging to kind of shift people and retool or reskill them?
Yeah, I don't think it's much like the whole cloud in general. I don't think it's a bits, bytes, speeds, and feeds or competency. I think it's a mindset is the real issue. Because the skill part's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's why we're all here this week, is to learn. So you opted in, and so by definition, you're learning every day. And I don't know that it's a specific role issue as much as it's an aptitude and an interest. And somebody that's embracing change, and it could be an individual that sees this as an opportunity to enhance your career because you're doing more interesting things or you have more career options, and it's true, it's in the same way it's true for the organization. The organization can get to market faster, they can save money ideally, they can out-innovate their key competitors to bring thoughtful new experiences to customers and business partners. So I think that's it. I do want to make a point about the whole notion of training. Because we're going to have to train ourselves out of this problem. Hiring each other as talent is not going to work. Velocity of the same people doesn't help the marketplace. So I'm really excited that over the course of the last week, AWS has made a number of announcements for a lot of net new curriculum and new ways in which you can consume it at much lower cost. We're moving things online, moving to a subscription-based model. We've offered, I think it was Monday, we offered 100 modules available at no charge. And so we realize at AWS that we play a central role in helping to unlock the potential of either existing IT professionals or those that want to enter into the market, and to do so at much faster and at much lower cost.
I'll add just a couple of quick things. First, one thing I have observed with our consultants, our technologists, they're absolutely hungry to learn this technology. Whatever we make available in terms of training on AWS, there are hundreds of people lined up ready to take the training. But in terms of adapting to the cloud, I think on the developer side, it's there's a 10 or 20% learning curve, but it's not too bad. If you're a Java developer, a .NET developer, you can learn to write native cloud systems pretty quickly. The infra side, obviously it's a big area, but there's oftentimes a little more learning there. So maybe something you were doing previously no longer is relevant in the cloud. So now maybe you're going to write some automation scripts or infrastructure as code. So there's sometimes a little bit more of a learning curve there. when you shift?
I think the core points are find folks who are adaptable,
Yeah.
right? Because it's constantly changing, flexible, willing to do different things, lifelong learners, right? And the ability to work as part of a community and team, right? Because going off and working in a siloed role is going to be non-existent soon.
Even the notion of having infrastructure versus applications,
Yeah.
when you're in the cloud, really
Blended.
it's merging.
Yep.
It's becoming the same thing. So,
Okay. Gary, let me pivot. You snuck in a word a little bit ago. I don't know if I'm the only one who picked up on it, which was lock-in.
Okay.
Talk to us a little bit about that. I mean, is that a concern? I mean, clearly yesterday in Andy's keynote, there was plenty to be locked in about.
Sure. I mean, I think you got to evaluate the options, right? I mean, there's an element of how's that any different than big on-premise lock-in, right? So I think it's really around where do you see the opportunities to grow your business, where you see the ability to drive some of that digitization of your organization and create agility and velocity. So, you know, we get a lot of questions around lock-in. We get a lot of questions around why AWS, why other technologies, and I think we really look at that as we're making good decisions based on where we are today and the products and services that are available to us, and we'll adapt, and much back to the people and the culture, the organization has to be adaptable and flexible as we go forward, and we'll see where we get to in the long run.
Do you go through any type of regular process annually as part of a strategic planning or budgeting process where you maybe regularly revisit some of those decisions and say, is there an alternative now that we should be thinking about?
We do. We're constantly evaluating technologies and services out there and our partners as we look at those things. As a matter of fact, we have our vendor summit in our organization next week where we're going to bring in our strategic partners, Sogeti, AWS, and talk about what some of those strategic initiatives are for us next year. And we evaluate that part of our business planning on an annual basis. So we're constantly looking at what are the options, where are the partners, where's the value that we could see for our organization.
Great. Yeah, Brett.
yeah, I get the question, Lanny, about lock-in all the time.
So do I.
Yeah, quite a bit. Honestly, my short answer to that is very simple. So what? I mean, as you said, Gary, we've always had lock-in. Who doesn't have an Oracle database they can't get rid of? I mean, it's been out there since IT's been around, and you're always going to have some. There's never going to be this dream scenario of any workload can go anywhere, anytime, on any platform. That said, my advice always, though, is place your bets carefully. Betting on an AWS, and I'm not just saying this because Jeff is sitting here, betting on an AWS, I think is safe. Look around this conference. They're not going to be gone next year. So place your bets carefully. And there are technologies today, too, containers, different things you can do to reduce lock-in. So obviously, any proprietary that you use, you're going to have some. But you can take steps. If it is a very big concern for your organization to not be too locked in, you can do things to mitigate the amount of lock-in that you have as well. It might be more work up front, but it'll make you more transportable later down the road.
You get anything, Jeff?
In a world that is pure utility, the extent to which what lock-in means for this generation of technology versus a decade ago versus 20, it's just not. They're not even comparable.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Things are changing so fast, right?
There's an opportunity cost, of course, to every decision that you make, and so I agree. You have to be very thoughtful and place your bets and realize that you're betting on a relationship, an innovation life cycle, the ease or friction of doing business. But by and large, for those that are most interested in having flexibility, portability, and cost arbitrage in the near or medium term and future, have never had it better.
As an objective agnostic moderator, I had to ask the question.
Yeah,
So,
thank you.
Let's go on to our third subject now, okay, which is around data-driven analytics. And then I think, we were all kind of, very, very impressed with the vision yesterday around moving into AI and machine learning as well. So Gary, let me start with you on this one. What are you guys doing now around just data management now? Because I think, as we get into this world of AI, and again, I like that one slide Andy used yesterday, where the first block was around getting the data right, getting it clean,
Sure.
getting it organized. So how do you guys think around managing data?
Yeah, I would say fundamentally for us, data is at the nucleus and the core of our business, right? And I would fundamentally believe that it's at the core of every business. So I think as we look at digitizing our business, looking at ways to disrupt the business patterns and processes that we have and innovate, it all circles around that data. How do we manage it? How do we control it? How do we secure it? I would say beyond securing, it's how do we create accessibility to it in the right forms and fashions through APIs and the right capabilities around that. So, there's a big focus on that for us. We're an organization through acquisition, so we have lots of different brands, and I would say we're certainly not there yet. But it's all around how do we look across those data elements, understand how they're categorized and classified, and how do we leverage them more effectively across that holistic life cycle to create, I'll say, different revenue streams for our organization, but also solve customer experience and customer challenges in our industry.
And Jeff, the whole concept of the cloud as a game changer for real-time processing, I mean, it's kind of obvious, but maybe elaborate a little bit, like maybe what have been some of the conversations where you can kind of move beyond the obvious and talk about something, much more insightful around that concept?
Well, I'm a sports fan, so at the risk of alienating those that you aren't, I loved watching the NFL session yesterday with the CIO from the NFL and Andy's keynote. And there was something we did earlier with Major League Baseball. I'm just going to leverage the game part of it, but I'm a huge baseball fan. But MLB created their StatCast, and they are using radar to measure the ball 2,000 times a second as it's, and they know where the players are, the umpires, and the ball is at all times. They're capturing approximately 7 terabytes of data every single game. And then in what they classify as near real time, they've fundamentally changed what the fans' experience is. And so there's a business that has been the average age of their fan is in fact aging. That's a challenge from a business strategy perspective. And so how do you make the product that you're offering to the marketplace more compelling, and particularly one that is more interactive? Well, that's all about data. And so I think it's a really terrific example, and relatively, something we can all appreciate, relatively straightforward in changing the nature of the business to enhance the experience for existing users and go out and capture net new customers.
Yeah.
I think another example is to make it something that's more substantive from a business perspective. I had the honor of being with one of our key customers in the central United States is Monsanto. Had the honor of being with them for a full day a couple of weeks ago. And what they've done using use our platform for geospatial data, and then they take that information and they provide very prescriptive guidance to farmers on when to plant, when to water, when to fertilize, what to plant, and when to harvest, and the extent to which that has a direct impact on the profitability of the farmer. It's all data. So there's example after example. We've learned a lot. Any breakout session you've had this week, probably, there's been numerous customer examples.
And Gary, when you think about back to your business again, I mean, you've got kind of the automotive piece of the business and you got the finance piece of the business. I'm obviously oversimplifying quite a bit. But how do you stack up the reliance on data, in those two kind of industry categories versus?
I don't see a difference, right? I think it's kind of that example of the data is your most prized jewel and asset, irregardless of your business. And I think we have to manage it, we have to secure it, we have to leverage it most effectively for your business and the outcomes that you want to look at. So I don't think there's a difference. You translate it to Major League Baseball, you translate it to the auction business, you translate it to any of yours. Fundamentally, your business runs on the data that you have and have access to, and how do you leverage, secure, and deliver your business outcomes around that is really the differentiator, I think, that we're headed into in the digital era, right?
Data in a lot of ways defines your relationship with your customer today.
Absolutely.
Hey, Brian, let me ask you one thing. I think you've heard me speak if you've paid attention when I've spoken.
Sometimes, yeah.
But one of the things I challenge customers on a lot is, we've made this wonderful investment in going from data to information to insights. We haven't done probably, the collective we, the market, hasn't done as great a job on going from insight to action to impact. So now that we have more of this opportunity to generate more data, to analyze it in incredibly, sophisticated ways. What are you seeing at kind of that last mile of leveraging data?
I think, and you asked Jeff earlier for some kind of, not the obvious examples. One trend I've been seeing lately is using both images and video to immediately create an action. As an example, an insurance company that can take a photo of a wall that has water damage, no agent involved, and automatically issuing a check for the repairs by simply analyzing and using the data on a cloud platform in this case to create that outcome from a business perspective. Jeff was mentioning some of the crops and so forth, the crop improvements one to plant, using drone images of fields to improve genomics and different things in terms of fertilizers and things like that. So using images, I think it plays well into the deep lens technology that's coming out as well. But using images and video to have immediate outcomes from your data, skipping by all 4 of the steps.
Okay. And one final lightning round question for all 3 of you. So still on the subject of data, but data protection, data security, data sovereignty, data personalization, I mean, major topics. And whether we go regionally around the world or we go industry-wise around the world, big topics. How do you guys think about that today? And what do you think some of the the resolutions are going to be in terms of addressing those with the cloud, or is cloud going to be, help us with that? Is going to be more of a challenge for that? So,
well, it's certainly fun.
Yeah.
If nothing else, right? No, I think, for us, we look at it as just an extension in the cloud of what we were already doing on premise, right? And I think those core tenets of, ensuring that you understand where your data is at, how you're securing it, how you're encrypting it, where that data flows, that opt-in, opt-out, and that security elements, it's irregardless of whether it's in the cloud or on-prem. And I think, in the industry and the world that we live in, it's a growing concern, but it's one that isn't new. It's one that just we have to continue to expand, deepen our capabilities and knowledge, and continue to push forward as we go forward.
Great. Jeff?
Doing it poorly is a career-ending experience. In contrast, though, doing it really well doesn't create any differentiation for you in your market. And as soon as that's true, you want to move that to somebody else. And so and this is more an observation as opposed to AWS official policy. Let's assume that there's more regulation, and whether it's law or whether it is industry-oriented. Having to consume an increasingly large percentage of an IT budget to determine how exactly that impacts you across the countries you do business in, you need to move that cost. And I think we are absolutely prepared to take on that responsibility, and we can afford to do so, and we intend to be the most secure cloud platform.
And that's exactly what I'm hoping for, is that when working with AWS, that aspect of the data sovereignty will be handled that way versus custom solutions every time we try to build something. Because we are still today building solutions that run in AWS, but also have options to keep the data on-prem, depending on the country where our customer's customer is operating. So getting rid of that complication over time will be fantastic.
Great. Well, thanks for your observations and your candidness. So we've got time, so why don't we open the floor to questions now? If you have one, there's 2 microphones here. Just step up. Maybe say your name and your company affiliation and who you want to direct a question to. We shortly have our first question.
Thanks for taking my question. My name is James Lee. I work for investment firm Mizuho Securities. Quick question on AWS. How should we think about your value differentiation from a sales perspective? Clearly, technology is fantastic at AWS. Just help us understand, from that perspective, as a sales director there, how do you differentiate versus your competitors?
So your question is really about what is the customer experience that we have today or envision in the future, or is something different? I was listening, but I'm not sure I understand the real essence
maybe
of
help
your
us
question.
understand, from the customer support perspective, how you differ versus some of the other competitive providers for cloud.
Thank you so much. Well, first off, just to be clear, I mean, if you remember one of Andy's initial slides, it's the slide that references all the services, and every version of that slide includes as a core component of our value proposition to the market and the promise we have to each of our customers, those customer roles. So, and it's the account executives and solution architects and professional services and the partner teams we have that work closely with Sogeti and CAP, among others, our enterprise support teams. So a full, the breadth of the roles that are critical to ensuring that we're driving to the customer's outcomes in the future. That's our primary responsibility. The leadership principle that drives us first and foremost as a customer-facing organization is customer obsession. And we measure our success in the same way the customer does. What are those tangible outcomes that they're driving, that Gary, as an example, owes to his counterparts in the business? I think there are a couple of things that are fundamentally different about our approach. First off, we were born in the cloud, and as a result, we think about the world as a pure utility model. We don't do large, complex contract negotiations and ask a customer to pay for things that they may never use. As I think one of the key differentiators. We have a set of mechanisms involving our customers around planning, architectural reviews, the ways in which we think about measuring our success, the extent to which we optimize spend for customers, which in almost every single relationship we have has us reduce the customer's spend consistently over time for a given set of services. I mean, I think those are just a couple of examples of things that are fundamentally different.
I do have a question for Brian, but somebody's over there, so it's up to you, moderator, if I could ask.
If you got a follow-up, go ahead, and then we'll shoot over.
Brian specifically, maybe help us understand from the analyst perspective, where is the cloud adoption happening at this point? Maybe look at your client base specifically, maybe give us an example, maybe a percentage of client already moving from on-premise to cloud, and maybe a percentage of client actually running complex analytics on the cloud. So just help us understand kind of where the adoption cycle is at this point.
So across the US, about 2/3 or so of our clients are on a cloud-first strategy today. Now, that means different things in different organizations. Some are well down a path and have significant numbers of workloads running in the cloud, including their most mission-critical systems. Some are almost entirely on the cloud. Most are somewhere in between. They've got a number of workloads in the cloud. They still have some critical things on-prem, but they usually have a plan to get things moved over the next year or two. So the most common state we have in our client base today, they're on a cloud-first journey. Anything new they're building, they're putting in the cloud. They're not adding more to on-prem that they have to move later. So anything new is going in the cloud, and maybe 20 to 50% of their workloads have been moved with a goal over the next year or two to have 90% moved. That would be the most common scenario, but there's, we have many customers at both extremes.
Are there any verticals that's like adopting early adopters, like fastest adoption? Any verticals that you see that's very slow at this point in time? Kind of help us understand what's really fast, what's really slow.
I don't see a huge distinction. We have financial services customers who are moving, manufacturing, CPG, retail. Healthcare maybe a little bit less so, but still we have Blue Cross Blue Shields that are starting their journey to the cloud. Plenty of public sector companies are moving to the cloud. So there's not one that's way an outlier in either direction.
Great, thanks.
Sure. Good questions, thank you.
Hi. I have two questions. One is, can you kind of share like a real project, like team size and timeline of like how long, not like a real trivial one, but like a sizable system or application that you migrated? How long did that take, and how many people did it take to do that? And then second thing is, we've been debating whether we should kind of lift and shift, then re-architect versus kind of re-architect first and then shift, lift. And again, not for some small trivial app, but for sizable enterprise. What are other companies doing for something like that?
Sure. Yeah, I can at least share some of our expertise. I'd say team size, we've typically looked in that like 8 to 10, 8 to 12 size. I've heard the new 2 pizza this week, so I think that's certainly
Amazonian.
That's right. So I think that's certainly an approach to that. When you ask about the project or the application and the duration. I'd say part of our big shift in movement is less about the application and more about the capabilities. So I think we're very focused on how do we create capabilities that then can be, compositely brought together to deliver business outcome. And that's an iterative approach. So I don't know that I can give you a timeline because I don't know that it ever really starts and stops. It's really more around how do we keep contributing capabilities, iterating and evolving capabilities, contributing those back into the ecosystem so that we can broaden really the outcomes that we want to achieve for our organization and to help our customers overcome their barriers. So.
Yeah, and I'll add, so splitting up lift and shift versus redesigning. When a lift and shift factory type of model, let's say you got 1,000 apps in a data center, you just want to close down the data center. The simple ones can be a matter of hours. It's not that complicated. Medium ones might be a matter of days, and the complex ones are more of a custom situation where you have to kind of figure out what's going on. So I don't know if it's so much a matter of team size as a matter of how fast you want to go, because a 5-person team might be able to do a lot in a lift and shift in a short amount of time. In a replatforming scenario, each application is its own situation, because if you're completely redesigning something, whether you're going in the cloud or redesigning it on-prem, you have to look at those one by one. But we typically try to keep our team sizes not too large, just again, kind of the two-pizza model. That's not our official policy, but I get the idea. But it just keeps things moving and keeps things quick and nimble and so forth. So.
The thing about the lift and shift and that approach to it, I think we touched about it a little bit earlier. Understanding your organization's risk tolerance and how they want to look at those things. I'd also say don't focus on the applications, focus on the workloads and the business processes. I think that's very key. What you don't want to do is start stretching out your ecosystem. You can certainly take a legacy application that's performing well, and you can engineer it out of a well-performed enterprise. And I think that's where you really have to understand, I think, the tools and the processes that partners like Sogeti and AWS have allow you to evaluate and determine those migration paths. But I'd say just choose wisely and make sure you're being intentional about it.
A point, if I can, it's about cost, the economics of the whole journey. The best practice is profile, segment, prioritize your apps.
Yep.
Think about it from a business process perspective. Don't let the hardest apps prevent you from moving the easiest. In a similar way that I was suggesting earlier about security. Don't let, and I think that you will likely, an organization will be better off moving as quickly as you possibly can as many of the, we'll call them the sort of simple to moderate difficulty. Harvest that savings. I think the point earlier was don't, go do the work around deeply understanding the cloud economics, to the point I made earlier. Assume under promise and over deliver against the savings is probably a best bet, but you will likely achieve savings, which then you can reinvest to either go create the new generation of cloud native applications for new business solutions, or you can fund the refactoring that you may need to do for some of the moderate to more challenging applications that need to be migrated. But I would say the key thing here is speed. And the migration that takes years is a killer, because you're having to absorb a cost bubble that you just simply can't sustain inside of an IT budget.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jeff, and I would reinforce that. I think acting is critical. Analyzing and debating and putting off is just tantamount to going backwards. I mean, trying to move is, I think, really important.
But I don't think these are different concepts, right?
No.
In the physical world, you wouldn't elongate a physical data center migration. Right. There's costs, there's complexities, there's risk. It's really not a different approach. It's just new technology that, quite frankly, we think has some strategic advantages.
Other questions? No.
What? There we go. It must be off. Yeah, Matthew Coates, I'm from Epsilon. So this kind of refers to a couple of you, but one of the statements that was made earlier was about being locked into a platform and so forth, and why you wouldn't want to do that. But what's happening is we have a lot of customers that are now wanting, and of course we're putting a lot of stuff into the Amazon cloud, and so it's great. Love it. I mean, got a lot of training on that, and we're doing well, and Amazon's been super supporting us. So, but the thing is we're actually running into issues where some of our customers are competitors to Amazon. So they don't want to go into the Amazon cloud, they want to go somewhere else, right? Azure or IBM or who knows, right? Google. And the question I kind of wanted to, and so what we're already starting to look at is how do we build platforms that we can shift from one cloud to another cloud to another cloud. And what I wanted to ask is, what do you see coming down the pipe? 20 years ago, virtualization was there, hardware was, everybody had to worry about different things, and that was the reason why it came out, was so you could just kind of have a platform, right? Do you see the same thing happening in the cloud area, where at some point it's a commodity, right? Where Amazon becomes a commodity, Azure becomes a commodity type thing, and granted, they all have their specific strengths, but you know how it happens. Over time, everybody catches up. Right? So that could be 5 years from now, it could be 10, but I don't think it'll be any longer than that.
So I think aspects of the cloud are a commodity today. Basic computing, basic storage, there's plenty of that can be, is pretty comparable. But I think to answer your first question, if you've got end customers that have, some of which can't run on AWS, and this does come up with other, especially in the retail space. Obviously, if you use an infrastructure as a service type of a model, things are relatively portable, as long as you design them correctly. But yeah, if you're going to take advantage of native AWS technologies, PaaS type capabilities, there's going to be some level of lock-in, and you're going to have a challenge, just being candid, with the customers that don't want to have their data on AWS. Things like Kubernetes can help. There's some other tools that can help, things that are a little bit more portable.
I was going to say there's tools and architectural patterns that you can put in place. Luckily, we don't have to have some of that conversation, but certainly some opportunities to look at from that perspective.
There are some things you can do for sure, but if you lose anything proprietary, you're going to have some level of lock-in.
I make two quick points. First off, on the retail side, many of the largest retailers in the world are running on our platform, and they do so because they're focused on creating, they want the ideal platform at the lowest cost, the agility associated with delivering new solutions to their users, and so they're leveraging the best tool set to compete in what is by definition a competitive market. Every one of the companies you represent has competitors. And very few companies will succeed by focusing on a competitor. What they do instead is focus on their customers and creating next generation solutions, services, and experiences for them. That's number one. The other thing is, as we're sitting here at Thursday at 1:15, it's been an incredible week in terms of the innovation that we've announced and the ways in which we've discussed not just what we're doing, but how to do it. And so I'm not going to agree that we'll all catch up. I think the analyst community would suggest we have a fairly significant lead, and it's one that we intend, through very hard work and all the feedback that you provide to us, maintaining and extending. And I think this week is a good example of what that innovation life cycle can be.
Okay, I want to be and need to be respectful of everybody's time. So thank you all for being here, and Gary, Jeff, Brian, thank you all for your time.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. Great
Thank
job.
you all.
Thanks.